Good afternoon, church. It's really a dream come true for this to happen today. Ever since I came to Middle, I've been thinking in the back of my head about bringing Michael Roberson to do this sort of session with the church. Got to see him do this about a year ago, almost, at St. Luke's in the Field. It is really a dream come true. Michael Roberson is a public health advocate, a people's intellectual, a public intellectual, but a people's intellectual who has come out of, within, and through many communities, including the house and ballroom community. I won't say too much. I'll let you experience Michael, actually. But he has a heart of gold, although that sounds a little capitalist, but a heart of love. Really consider him a godfather, a mentor, intellectual mentor of mine coming from Union Seminary where we hung out a lot, and he stays up much later than I'm able to. But a lot of late nights talking and arguing and debating. And it's just an honor to have you here, Michael, and I'll let you introduce everyone. Thank you for coming.
So, good afternoon. Y'all almost did it like the way I like it, but let's do that again. I'm a big fan of choirs, and when I say good afternoon, we'll do that in unison. Good afternoon. So you got to let folks know we are in this place today, and particularly because it is the anniversary. And so what does it mean to, there's a womanist socialist ethicist named Emily Towns, and she talks about this notion of, I knew you would like that. Memory can be an emancipatory praxis. How we remember who we remember is utterly important. And the notion of remembering is so important because one of the things we'll learn about the black struggle for freedom, that the notion of that we call slavery, its project was to make us forget. I always tell people that the utter blessing for me to come through the womb of a black woman. Yeah, I heard that. It's Ashe, a woman, and amen, right? That in the womb of this black woman for 9 months was my very first conversation with that in which I call God. And that in this womb, this thing called God planted in the very DNA, in my bones, the very truth of who I was. So that when I came out into the world, when the world told me something different, the cells of my DNA said, Ashe, no, don't believe that. And so my mother, this black woman, was the incubus of everything that's holy and ghost for me. How I remember that is utterly important. So we're going to engage in this conversation in which I call the trans sounds of black freedom. And then oftentimes, how do we atone for a sin? Eradicate the very folk that our freedom has come through. When we think about LGBT communities, oftentimes we think that particularly the hegemonic notion of white male gayness created this space. And even in black LGBT community, we think that black gay men are not patriarchal, right? But that if not for trans folks, there will be no such thing called freedom movement in this community. There's a no longer Harlem Renaissance writer named Zora Neale Hurston that says black women are the mules of the earth, always being trampled on. I oftentimes situate that with saying that black women have been, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, as the Christ in our community, always giving, self-sacrificing, always lifting everyone up, having to even lift up the oppressor's children. But in the moment of her need, who was there for her? So black women are the mules of the earth. I then say that black trans women are lodged somewhere between Howard's notions of the disinherited and Frantz Fanon's notion of the wretch of the earth. But like black women, black trans women make a way out of no way. And this way has been Ballroom. And we're going to engage in this kind of conversation around what does it mean to be in a community that's created a way out of no way. And I'm going to say this real fast and so that we can move forward, that I'm going to situate, at least attempt to situate through these three schemas I call. The philosophical. Great philosopher named Montaigne says that philosophy is learning how to die. How do you die from that which you've been told you were? But if a philosophy is learning, and then you ask the question. So the philosophical question is, what does it mean to be human? in the face of real catastrophe. So philosophy is learning how to die, then theology for me is rebirth. And so you die and then you're reborn and you ask the question, who am I now? And this is black, silver. And you'll hear me invoice black women all day, every day. So there is, and I see you smiling, there is this black no longer labor leader named Ella Baker, who then asked the political question, who are your people? And if you are not engaged in a conversation dialogically with a people, then your political discourse is null and void. So we're going to talk about these three things, right? But the other thing we're going to do is we're going to watch videos. My colleague, Roberson, who I call my soulmate in this work, knows me very well. Rob does as well. That YouTube is my pedagogy. I'll look for YouTube videos, place them together, place them in conversation. Part of that is because Robert and I belong to an international sound art collective called Ultra Red. And Ultra Red arises, emerges out of ACT UP. It happens to be 30th anniversary of ACT UP. Let's do that. And artists began to ask this question in relationship to what ACT UP put up over and against Ronald Reagan's neoliberal politics, that silence equals death because he was utterly silent about the AIDS epidemic. And so that if silence equals death, and sound can equal life. Om, in Hindu, the sound of the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, the sound, right? And so we're going to watch videos, and we're going to get engaged in what I call a listening session. And so when we do this, I want you to be your full self. Yes, you're going to see some performances, and if you decide to say, yes, sing or perform, do all those things, Black church calls it the call and the response. This will be dialogical. It won't be just me standing up here talking at you. We'll be engaged in this conversation and creating this discourse together in this moment, because it is this moment that's most important. Throughout this, the beginning, so we're going to have 8 videos. That's a lot, I know. 8 videos, but 2 separate iterations. The very first iteration is what I call the Black struggle for freedom. I'm going to, in many ways, have us look at the multidimensionality of where Ballroom sits in this space called the Black struggle for freedom. And then after we watch these videos, I'm going to ask you just to remember 3 things, 3 propositions. What did you hear? What did you see? What did you feel? We're going to talk about that for about 20, 25 minutes. And then we're going to do this thing called the Trans Sounds of Black Freedom. We're going to watch some videos. I'm going to call my tag team performers. I'm just opening act on the stage, and we're going to engage in, again, a conversation. Is that okay? Y'all sure? Yeah. So, I'm supposed to give you my Rhythm Nation cue that I'm ready for the videos. So let us, for a minute or so, sit with that, the spirit of the ancestors. Move through this room as we engage in this conversation that make it difficult. That moves us to go beyond the surface kind of conversation, that in which the spirit is asking for, the kind of healing, deep resonating healing. How do we remember? How do we hear those voices who are no longer here? It's a guy named Bob Rafsky, who's a big ACT UP member. And I remember one of my favorite videos that I oftentimes show is when ACT UP used to do these political funerals. And the moment when one of the ACT UP members was dead, and they marched the dead body from the Judson Memorial Church down to Bush's re-election headquarters. He gives a soliloquy, makes a statement. When the living can no longer speak, the dead may speak for us. Sometimes it's important for us to be tongue-tied. Let that which we call Holy Ghost speak through us. So as we open up this conversation, you can raise your hand, let the Spirit move you to say something. I asked you just 3 things. What did you hear? seeing these things, these videos together? What did you feel? And what did you see? What did you hear? What did you see? What did you feel? And as the Spirit moves, so shall someone say something. I won't look at you in your face and go like this. Are you going to? No, won't do that. What did you hear? What did you see? What did you feel?
Jacqui Lewis here, and I'll just start us off by saying, just beautifully well put together. Fascinating to think about Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation dream, and the video. I don't know that song, but a kind of naive hope that she expressed so beautifully that you helped us to see, like that we're not there, we didn't make it there. The somewhere over the rainbow dreaming thing. The dreams we all have of a world that we can create together, and the strong sense of intersectionality of the oppressions, right? Like people just shot dead just for being gay. Like people lynched, shot dead just for being black. In prison just for being Japanese. The way human hatred can just know no bounds, and the victimization of so many of us should bind us together in a struggle for justice, right? Yeah, beautiful, beautifully well done.
And thank you for, of course I knew you would, bring some wonderful things up. One of the first things that you brought up, this notion of Janet Jackson, so of course, you heard my little reference, my Rhythm Nation cue to, I'm a Janet Jackson fanatic, so let's just put that out there. But one of the things she says in the song, I Should Have Known Better, right? She says, I had a great epiphany, and Rhythm Nation was a dream, but I should have known better. It's almost this double consciousness, Martin King's dream, Malcolm X's nightmare, right? I should have known better, right? Here is, and it is this notion that what Cornel West oftentimes brings up, Socratic energy, the pushback, the introspective work to say that, wait a minute, I was naive, and I don't want to be that poster child of naivete any longer. Thank you for that.
Hi, Connor Weiss. See if I can get this out in some kind of coherent manner, because so many, so many light bulbs and bells were going off during the whole thing. I mean, starting with just the picture of Tamir Rice at the beginning of that little boy who was just blown, that just.
Yeah.
I'm still having trouble processing that one. But the silence equals death thing is the thing that keeps kind of echoing, that sound being life, silence being death. And that if we don't talk about these things, then everything dies with it. The lack of conversation, the lack of sound, the lack of noise. Because I know I grew up in a house where everyone was just like, anything that wasn't pleasant. No, we're not going to talk about that. Or, no, that's not really happening, even though it was. Just like what's happening in our government now. Well, no, that's not really happening. And just, the impulse that I even had at times when something is really intense or something that makes me really angry, just to avoid that being angry, avoid getting angry, avoid expressing it when I'm angry. And just, and I look around and just, the news, and I look around at things that have happened that I've noticed over the years, the damage that not getting angry and not expressing that and not making noise has done. Just the whole be quiet thing, just how incredibly destructive that is, and not remembering and just kind of pushing stuff out, just getting rid of the noise in my head, just block it out, when basically the only way to get rid of the noise in your head is to have it come out of your mouth, you know. But that's basically what hit me.
Thank you. And oh yes, okay, I like this. And so, and I want to dichotomize silence, right? There's a different kind of silence when you sit still simply because you are afraid. You've been taught to be afraid to speak up, to speak out, to have a critique. But there's also the silence necessary to hear the sound of God. Yeah. Oftentimes when we sit still enough, you hear the voice of God in your voice and you realize there's no difference. Hey, come on now. Come on, good people, come on. Yeah, that's right. I love that. I'm going to steal that, so know that, right? Difference between sins. But thank you for that.
So for me, thank you so much, by the way. For me, it was looking at all of this and knowing that some of our people have been put in the altar of sacrifice. But it is for us to continue to be unbreakable, right? Because even they were unbreakable. This is just one dimension, and then that sacrifice, we must take it as a responsibility to be unbreakable and to move forward and to fight, right? And to stand up and rise.
And to recognize that men have to stand up more, because it's always much more damaging to women. Women have historically been told that you have to be unbreakable. Right? And the men can then stand behind. And so the self-sacrifice that women oftentimes give over and over and over again not only has damage to their spirit, but winds up creating dis-ease in that in which we call body, right? That the sacrifice has to be in spaces of reciprocity. Men have to, and I mean men, whether it's trans men who can blend now. So don't play with me, right? Whether it's black gay men who refuses to deal that they're still men and patriarchal. Whether it's white gay men who refuse to deal with the fact that they come out to the world as oppressed, but they live privileged lives. We're not doing that. So thank you for that.
Thanks for the YouTube 8 videos.
I heard you in the back too. You was like,
I think I saw or felt and heard like 3 different things. The one thing that resonated with me was I could be on the other side. Yeah. Then the part of the expectation of how hard it was to fight to get your child through school to be something, and then for that to happen. This death thing, sometimes death is not physical, but spiritual. Yeah. And we die way longer than the actual physical death, right? And then the last part was, I just came back from a trip, and for a moment there, I felt like I was connecting to my ancestors. I went to the Bahamas, right? This is really weird. And so, nice ship, whatever, right? And then for a moment, it was, your ancestors didn't have this privilege because we're going across the Atlantic Ocean. They didn't have that privilege. And when I got to the Bahamas, a certain part of it, there were no inhabitants. I'm like, where are the people? But this death thing, this killing of souls, the killing of black folks, the killing, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, we can go on and on and on, has been happening for such a long time. And if we don't speak up, it's not going to stop. But I don't know if I want to live a life every day of feeling like I must be unbreakable. That's right. That's a lot of work.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I love your notion around the ancestors did not have this privilege and this thing around death. Cornel West talks about that, this thing around the gifts of black folk, right, in the age of terrorism. and that death is not physical, it's psychic, it's social psychic, right? It is economical as well. But one of my great radical feminist lesbian named Ruby Sales talks about across this space that we call the Atlantic, that these black folk had to create in the bowels of the slave ship a pedagogy of somebodyness, even when they couldn't speak the same language, that sustained us, right? And one of, I believe, our mistakes is that theologically we situated that through Christianity. That's called black ontology, that can be situated anywhere. But we've given over the credit, our resiliency to that thing that we call Christianity. And I have this notion that Christianity didn't say black folk say Christianity. The world overlooks at it differently simply because of the struggle of a black people who then created a religion. We talked about this, that Ruby Sales talks about black folk religion. Black folk religion is not just Christian. And we're going to watch it. So we're going to see some Vogue, and you're going to see black folk religion in Vogue, right? Right? It's not just Christian, right? It is not just Nation of Islam, right? But it's this, there's this ontology. That's what I call the all-wing of a people. What does it mean for a people to be chatteled and murdered and brutalized over 400 some odd years across the Atlantic and still create that kind of resiliency? So that, and what you're talking about, what you have situated is that. So thank you for that. And Rob, you stop being my pastor on the side. Go, hey, you're going to get me started going like this.
I guess all of the early part people have commented on, but the last part, I was wanting to tribute my very dear mentor, Mark Reynolds, who was an ACT UP member, and he died in '88, sadly to say. But because of him, I kind of understood that the gay culture and the life and the joy and the intersectionality, the inclusiveness just was something I had never seen before, you know, that they welcomed everyone, they tolerated everyone, it was a revelation, and he was a wonderful, joyful person, and of course died of AIDS, but I still have my silence is death button. But that was the thing that I got the most from that time, was just the acceptance and the range, you know, of all of the different genders and ways of expressing yourself and ways of being that was celebrated through that movement, which continues to this day. But that was represented in that last video, and I love that. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to place you and what you said in conversation with one another. And Dr. Lewis, you also brought it up, this notion of intersectionality. Of course, we know that was created as a term through a black feminist named Kimberly Crenshaw as a legal scholar. But its roots is in black feminism that stems from the 60s, which that root comes from Latin American women in the 60s dealing with this notion of class and gender, right? One of my great mentors is a woman named Ebony Marshall Turman. She calls it quadrilateral forms of oppression, right? Quadrilateral. You know, we like to make up terms, so don't worry about it. Quadrilateral. It sounds like so. Quadrilateral. Y'all go, Yeah. We like to make up terms. But that's my mentor. And she talks about this notion of passing, going beyond W.E.B. Du Bois' notion of double consciousness in many ways is patriarchal in the first place, but talking about race and class and gender and sexuality, right? Part of the reason why I placed these three things in conversation, because a house ball community, in which we're getting ready to talk about, is multidimensional in this space, because it's a black and Latino LGBT community, right? So everything that impacts black people impacts this community. Everything that impacts Latino people impacts this community. Everything that impacts gays, lesbians, women, it's all converging in this one community. And so if you saw the last video, when you saw the last video, you saw images after images after images, the name after name after name of people who are dying. How does this community create still? How do they have the social imagination just like those who lived on the plantation, who died and lived on the plantation and died and was born in the plantation and died to over 200-300 years and believed that one day we could be free when you never saw freedom? How do we do that? This ontology, right? This resiliency. The ballroom is a descendant of not only black resiliency, but the LGBT resiliency that comes out of ACT UP and all of those other things. So thank you for bringing that up. The one thing I do want to say this, and we'll move to the conversation around house ball, to this point around these points around these multiple notions of death. And I talked about this thing that philosophy talks about. Philosophy is learning how to die, and you ask the philosophical query, what does it mean to be human and struggle for freedom, right? And I said that theology is about rebirth. But then you have to ask this theological question, what does it mean to be fully human and fully divine when you have been articulated as the abomination to God? How does one do that? How does one wake up and believe, right? And so you'll see this politics, Ella Baker, who are your people? How do you then make the political decision to organize, not around the notion that I don't want to die, but I deserve to live? Those are two separate things. Two separate things. So, that being the case, now you can really see some fun stuff. Some fun stuff, some serious stuff. And we're going to do this thing that I call the trans sounds of black freedom about the house ball community. I'm going to tell you each video now. You're going to see the first video. Sylvia Rivera, Puerto Rican, radical trans woman. Come on, let's y'all. Yeah, the Ashes that I mean. I say y'all. That's right. Yes. In 1973, you'll see her at a gay liberation rally in Washington Square Park. And you'll see the attention in the room, in the space, not the room, but in the park, where there are some radical, Robert, every time I say radical, you're calling everyone radical. You'll see some folks who call themselves radical, white lesbians, you'll hear them to some degree, having an issue with her being on the stage, this notion of what constitutes a woman. All right, hey. And so she is screaming, and she sends out a message, the audacity, how dare you? How dare you not let me, of all people, that if not for me and my sister Marsha and another black Latina trans women and white street kids, poor kids, not you, middle-class white gay men, if not for us, you would never be here, and you don't want me to speak. So you'll hear that as I call the trans assertion. Then you're going to see the life story, not the life story, but a little bit of the pioneer and icon Tracey Norman. Pioneer in terms of the fact that she started walking balls in 1977. But what's interesting about Tracey, she was the very first African-American trans supermodel of the world. Before Beverly Johnson was in Italia Vogue, she was, 1977. She was on the Clairol box, and this is what you'll see. And then she was at a photo shoot. From a place in the conversation what constitutes a woman with Sylvia and this white lesbian. She was at a photo shoot, and the photo shoot became a little negative. And it came out that she was trans. And so they took her contract away. And so for 30-some-odd years, she stopped working. But this one, she brings, if I could show you this video, and we'll talk about this one here. She has a name, I'm just saying this one right now, who asserts last year, when we give Tracey an award, and named an award after her, and she gets it, and she says, you let me know that when something is for you, it's for you. 30-some-odd years later, Clairol calls her back. Why does Clairol call her back? Because New York Post is writing an article about her and talking about what happened. Clairol never knew that's why she stopped working. And what really happened, here's this notion of what constitutes a woman, Susan L. Taylor, Essence Magazine, is the one who stopped her. What constitutes, here's this notion of what constitutes a woman. So when they went to Susan and asked her, and she said she had no comment until the article came out. Then she had comments. And she says, I would never do that. I would kind of believe her if she then didn't begin to use this kind of language. It'd be different if we were reading a transcript from 1975. She then says, we always knew that Tracey was a man. She had big hands and big feet. Yeah, right? So Clairol calls her back, and you're going to see a commercial that Clairol put out about her. Then we're going to watch these 3 performance videos. I want y'all to really get into this, right? Who watches RuPaul Drag Race? We're going to problematize that a little bit. But there is a theological and political reason around trans performance. That, and Milton, you know this as well as I know, when we were young doll babies, that trans performances were oftentimes always on a Sunday. Always on a Sunday. That's not accidental, because we were ostracized out of church. So the club became the church now. And the trans performance becomes a hermeneutics of the body, how you read this text. So our performance is a but it also becomes a homiletics, a way of ministering to a community watching to eliminate the pain. Here becomes a problem, just like when oftentimes black women in churches or whose voices are oftentimes used to lift up a church, but church still remains patriarchal. Right? Black gay men are still patriarchal because when the lights go down, we don't know trans women unless they're the spectacle for us. So we're going to watch these performances. I want y'all to get into it. If you be like, sing, whatever. All those things. You're going to see Princess Janae, who's a great friend of Tyrus, who is no longer here. We did a play / exhibition in the Jersey Performing Arts Center called Norcus Burning, and she opens up the play. One of the things that we did not know that she was dealing with cancer and a lot of pain. She winds up dying. So here is not knowing her full humanity. And then you're going to watch a different kind of performance, different tone, Raquel Lord, who is an icon in the house ball community and the pageant community, and she lip syncs Let Us See. And then the last thing you'll see is Leyomi. Leyomi is a legend in the house ball community of Vogue. She was part of a group called Vogue Evolution that was on MTV. And Leyomi, during an interview that Robert and I and some other folks, mostly Robert and our colleague Dot did around the Ballroom Oral History Project, interviewed Leyomi. Leyomi says, to be black and Latina growing up in the Bronx is to be angry all the time. I vogue to save my life. I place that in conversation that James Baldwin said to be black and relatively race conscious is to be angry all the time. I write to save my life. And he goes and exiles to Paris. You're going to watch Leyomi Vogue in Paris to a community that now has organized itself. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's it. So my Rhythm Nation cue. So, you know, part of what's going to happen is I'm going to get each one of y'all to do this. Yeah. All right. So, as I am going to ask the panelists or the conversationalists to enter the stage, you do your LSS, and I'm going to introduce them, but enter the stage. And as they're entering the stage, real quickly, anyone hear, see, feel about, give me a couple of what you saw in terms of all 5 of those videos. Yeah, yo. Real quickly. Anyone, hear, see, feel.
Very first video, it just spoke so profoundly to me of Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman.
Ain't I a Woman.
That just resonated so profoundly.
So, before that, I do love when Holy Ghost is speaking, right? And so you not only articulated that in a very wonderful, poignant historical statement. Not just that, but through the whole thing. I was sitting there thinking around, as we're talking about this tension to some degree with the Sylvia Rivera and the lesbians, and then Susan L. Taylor and Tracy Africa, and then you see these lip sync performances. And here is this conversation where these trans women are invoking these cisgender. Here is this dialogical, beautiful, wonderful conversation. So thank you for that. Go ahead.
It's actually more profound than that for me, because their femaleness is ahead pulling me as a female. The liberation that they have with their bodies, with their presentation, with the way they claim all of it is almost liberating and opening doors for me as a female, where I've been taught not to, you sit this way, you act that way, you're too big, you can't wear red, blah, blah. They're miles ahead and opening doors emotionally for me.
I'm done. I'm done.
Wow.
I'm taking you on the road.
I thought that
We're going to do this together. Real quickly, why you're so wonderful. So, a great colleague, friend of ours and Rob's, Anika Gibbons, who is no longer here, is an independent filmmaker. She did a documentary on womanism. And in one of our events, she said the same thing. And so I went to Union, and Rob will tell you, you're in my room, you're watching these kind of videos all day, every day long, and a lot of the cisgender women said the same thing. It critiques, or the places in conversation, an old feminist critique. The old feminist critique is that trans women are reducing women to hyper-notions of femininity. There is some validity in that, right? There is some validity in that truth. But what it does do is just stops there. It's a critique without an analysis. What it does not do is two things. I love Janet Jackson, right? So Janet Jackson, YouTube was not always around. YouTube came about because of Janet Jackson's breast at the Super Bowl. And so that's how they created YouTube. And so as a result of that, and so many Black and Latino gay men, hairdressers, makeup artists, choreographers, they're taking these videos to cisgender women, right, who are in entertainment. And now you're having these cisgender women performing trans women. If I had a longer time, I would show you who Amber Rose stole her whole look from, named Tanya Prada. If I had longer time, I would show you who Tamar stole her look from. Her name is Sanaya Ebony. In fact, if you look at most reality TV shows, most of the cisgender women there are speaking black gay lingo and performing these trans women. This thing that Beyonce does, she got it from Leyomi, not the reverse. Not the reverse. So then the critique becomes, then what does it mean for them women to, in some ways, view their femaleness through the lens, through the performance of a trans woman? It's not one over the other, it's dialogical. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. Two things. One, just way back, there's language. And I feel that the trans community are still exploring their language, even with the gay people, because when I first came out, lesbian was not used. It took a while before it became lesbian. Then transgender came afterwards. So language is still being explored where we can find the word of commonality that we're not offensive to anyone in our own community. So there has to be more cohesiveness with the gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, everything community. And with that, there's power. Yeah. So if we can stop fighting each other is my wish and be more, Beth had mentioned when ACT UP came up, it brought a community together. Prior to that, that wasn't, And it did start with, I believe, white males, gay men. So, and then we all joined because this was a community in crisis. So that aspect, I feel, still been explored. I feel that there's still a lot of animosity one way or another, and yes and no, and stop it, and that's why it's important to have events like this to speak to a larger majority, and hopefully it's on video and someone can see it. Second of all, Paris is Burning was an amazing video. And when I first was coming out, I love what's happening now. Can we have something very similar for younger folks that are coming out that can see something as beautiful as Paris and Burning that's on Netflix?
So two things, what you said, and then I'll introduce the panelists. One is, let me start with the latter. Let me problematize Paris is Burning. So Paris is Burning, utterly great in terms of its documentation that it is the thing that we have. Right? It is artistically wonderful. It's culturally exploitive. Here's a white lesbian who, and some credence to her, right? But here's a white lesbian who comes into a community, and it is her thesis project and becomes a film. Now, of course, her intent in the beginning was for it not to become a film. And so the community then is shown in sort of what I call a pathological way. That then she goes on, and she doesn't make millions of dollars of it, but it opens up a whole bunch of capital for her. One, it is probably the most watched documentary in history, right? It is told through the lens. So Judith Butler, Judah Butler and the creation of queer theory in many ways is created, is formulated as a critique of Paris' burning. So here's a community creating things, but no reparations. No reparations. To that point, there is a community-level project by another trans person, a black trans man named Seven King, who is a biological son of hip-hop pioneer Grandmaster Flash, who did something called a Rebirth of Paris, and we're looking at redoing that. Your second thing about language, this is truth, this is my belief. So we call it this trans moment as if something like God said, you know what I forgot to create? Trans people. And we do the same thing. I forgot to create them. This is the moment, right? Yet, to your point, it is a moment in the way that the universe is illuminating things. To teach us all language, right? Let me give you a good example. There was a women's group talking about, for all women, just sitting there having conversation. So a woman raised her hand and said, I need some advice. Me and my partner, my husband, we've been together for a long time, and we're trying to have a baby. So the woman's like, oh, okay. We need some recommendations to try to get him pregnant. Stop. They did not know she was a trans woman, that's number one. Right? She passed, the notion of passing. But trans people are having a conversation with science and correcting it, having a conversation with God and correcting science. Because for so long, science said that men can never get pregnant. And trans men say, you want to bet? You want to bet? This is how, if we're going to talk about the omnipresent, omnipotent of that in which we call God, it can do in all things. And trans in this moment are saying, we are a reflection of that in which is called holy and perfect and infinite. So thank you for that. So I ain't going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and this is how we're going to do this, because one of the things, if you read the language that Rob put out, that was so wonderful, it is my assertion that the ballroom community is first and foremost a Black Trans-Womanist theological discourse. Why do I say that? It comes out of Black folk moving from the north, move from the south to the north, shifting around collective consciousness, right? Booker T. Washington notions that the rise of Black peoples through trade education. And Du Bois said, no, is a radicality of being Blackness, and art has a place in that. And so Harlem becomes a Black Mecca, right? And this art movement called the Harlem Renaissance is created. So forgive me, some folk, if I step on some folks' feet, but there is a church in Harlem called Abyssinian Baptist Church. And its founder, or one is the elder, Adam Clayton Powell Sr., created a 3-decade campaign to get rid of Black queers out of Harlem. He sermonized through the church. He operationalized his sermon through the New Amsterdam News because he owned it. And he created this campaign, and what came out of that, there are 3 ways that Black queer folk, I'll do the quotation, queer folk congregated, one in beauty salons, one at rent parties, you have a party, pay your rent, and the other one were drag balls. And drag balls become the largest movement. So here's a theological movement, right? The theology of mattering, right? That becomes politicized. And then after World War II, when other cities became Blacker, Chicago, DC, Detroit, Philadelphia, these drag balls migrate there. But in 1967, here's this moment. Ella Baker talked about, who are my people, right? Crystal Abeja, a Black trans woman who is at a pageant, who thought that she should come in first place. She critiques racism in the drag ball pageant circuit. And she walks off stage. And if you want to YouTube it, I swear to God, it's funny. It's called the legendary Crystal Abeja, the language you would think is a 2017. So she goes on this tirade, reading the girl. You know, how dare she win? Look at her makeup. She doesn't look beautiful than me. There is a Black drag performer named Phil Black, who was the only drag performer who had his Screen Actors Guild card. He then says to Crystal, let's go back to the all-Black drag Harlem circuit. And we'll have a ball, and we'll name it after you. So this is in 67. Now, I reimagined stuff in my head. This didn't really happen, this part I'm going to say. That's 67. And then 69, I say then, so 68, Marsha and Sylvia meet Crystal at a diner between uptown and downtown. and said, you know what, we're going to shake some shit up here, excuse me, in church. You shake it up uptown in Harlem, and we'll shake it up in Greenwich Village in Stonewall. And so between 67 and 69, I call this trans political movement between these black and Latina trans women, right? Then ballroom then morphed from drag because only trans people participated, to house ball, the creation of houses. First houses named after these famous trans women. And why between 67 and 73? Because 67 is when Crystal made her assertion. 1969 is Stonewall. 1970 is the first gay pride movement across the world in New York City. 1970 is also the very first house created, House of La Beja. This is a political movement, be real clear. And in 1973, gay men began to walk balls, and the creation of a house, mother and father, right? And then the 70s and then the 80s roll around, and then we have HIV and AIDS, and Latinos begin to emerge in the house ball community in 82, and called through the House of Extravaganza, right? So I want to first ask the first question to this is my iconic sister. She'll introduce herself. I love her. I've known her forever and a day. We're going to profiteer her book up here, but and Tyra, I want you to introduce yourself. By introducing yourself, say what you heard, what you see, what you saw, and you felt, and respond to this notion that if for you as a black trans woman, if that it was your people, if it was not for your body, creating this space, what does it feel in this moment to continue to hear black trans women being murdered in such a way, right, that's not lifted up during the Black Lives Matter discourse, and even in a space called ballroom, it's not lifted up. So again, say who you are, what you heard, what you saw, and you felt. And
that was a lot.
I know it was.
Okay. Well, I am Dominique Jackson. I reclaimed my own name, but Tyra A. Ross, Alora Ross, Masai Milan, Alora, somewhere around that. That was the woman that I had to become in order to understand my femininity and in order to embrace it. Tyra A. Ross hit the stages. As Tyra A. Ross, I was able to protect myself and heal and grow and understand that my femininity was not an abomination. It was actually praise to the dialogue that the woman is actually not only the creator, but it is from whence we all come. It is from whence we begin. And so I was able to move forward in life. But along this journey, I had to learn from my sisters. And a lot of my sisters and brothers ended up sacrificing themselves, some not voluntarily. But when we look back from Crystal LaBeija to Octavia St. Laurent, to Danielle Revlon, to these amazing women who stood in their truth at a time when most people were not supposed to. And I will say this, as white privilege took over and male privilege took over, and trans women were now not the forefront of the Stonewall Rebellion, but we were pushed to the side, and it was now a gay issue, then it was a lesbian issue. We were almost it was an attempt to erase us. What people didn't understand about Stonewall is that when you walked into Stonewall as a gay man or as a lesbian, when the cops raided, you were able to dance with each other. You were able to switch it out. But for the 6'2" person with a 5 o'clock shadow that's coming in with hair down their back, who do you dance with? Who do you hide from? So we face the brunt of the attacks. We face the brunt of discrimination. And so now we're saying to the world once again, okay, we helped you back in 1969 and you forgot about us. And now a lot of us here have remembered that it was Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, Black and Latino women, and we have now taken that fight back up. Danielle Revlon continued it just by living in her truth. Octavia St. Laurent, just by living in their truth. And now you hear of women like Laverne Cox, and you hear these stories of parents being supportive. Well, it was those women back then, like Crystal LaBeija, Danielle Revlon, Octavia St. Laurent, because the trans community has always been watched. We have always given power. Why? Because we do not take our femininity for granted. We don't get to wake up in the morning at times and look down and go, okay, everything matches. But we must put forth the femininity that is in us so that the world sees us as the women that we are. So yes, we do get murdered. Why? Because of uncomfortability with other people in understanding that we are human beings. It's not about male, it's not about patriarchy. For so long, women have been marginalized and pushed under that people fail to realize that a trans woman speaks volumes to the fact and the depth of the power of the female body. And for us to be born with assigned male at birth, we should embrace that because we're the strength, right? The man is the strong one in the life. He does everything. No. So now in 2017, trans women are being murdered, and I call it a sacrifice to teach each and every one of us that the strength comes from the woman, from the womb. We are all female in that first trimester. Let's do the science. Science and spirituality and religion go hand in hand. If we stop cherry picking and face the reality, we will embrace women. We will embrace trans women for allowing us to understand that femininity is power. It's not an abomination. It is not a weakness. It is an amazing strength. So thank you.
And so, Tyra, I want to ask you one more question, and we'll open it up. One is that, and we have this, so one of Tyra's great friends was Princess Janae, the one who performed and was scatting. And when Princess Janae died, and I would have Tyra in the room showing that performance, Tyra oftentimes walked out. Could not. I'm wondering, in this moment, what does it feel for you now to be able to see? I was sitting there, and I swear to God, heard her say, thank you. I would never have known a day that me as a black trans woman, my performance would be shown in church. Right? So what for you, sitting in this space, particularly the history, not this particular space of church and us, what does it feel like seeing Princess Janae?
To see this actually is a dream come true for her. And it is a re-strengthening of my confirmation that the church is not where we go to, but the church is a part of us. When Princess Janae got ready for work, which is what we called it, and she went in, we had this debate before she way before things happened with us, and it was about doing gospel in the clubs. And we went back and forth with it for a while. And she said to me, I'm from the church. The church is me, and I'm going to give it to everyone else because a lot of us cannot go to church and feel comfortable. And so she would go out there and she would perform Yolanda Adams. She would perform other gospel music. And to see people actually come into this and embrace it, because you're in a club, there's alcohol, there are things going on in the bathroom, you're not thinking of this, let me find spirituality. But when that music came on, and I would look around, and I stood corrected, because it was she was ministering. To everyone, to the issues that they had that we thought we had to come to church to actually, to a physical church, to actually understand and to heal. The battle is not yours, it's the Lord's. It is one song that she would do, and the entire club would come to a standstill. Just, you would see tears, you would see people worshiping, you would see, and I was always taught that the club was the devil. It was an abomination because that's where you go. But for us, it's where we were able to find ourselves. We were able to be ourselves, and a part of us is the church. It's how we grew up. So she was amazing with that. So to see her in the church right now performing, I know it's where she belonged and where she actually wanted to be. And I don't have to run out of the room anymore, because we have to learn to face our truths. If we hurt, we have to face that pain. We can't run away from it, and we can't project it onto others.
Thank you for that. If you think about the videos and you remember, particularly Raquel, and after a while, Raquel performing sometimes was hard to hear because you heard the crowd screaming her name like she was Jesus. What does it feel like to be a black trans woman, to be in a space and hear your name called like it's God? Leyomi's performing. Leyomi, Leyomi. Same as Jesus. Same as Jesus. Right? Paris is an interesting space, particularly because they've organized themselves in the early 2000s in the same way that Ballroom was created through Harlem. And so that space that Leyomi is performing, she becomes the minister. So thank you for that. So Robert, I'm going to skip my daughter. We're going to go back to the daughter, though. But Robert, this is my soulmate in this work. There's nothing that I don't do without this good old Robert Simber. And I want to engage you in this conversation because we talked about 81 and this rare cancer, 41 gay men in San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York City with this rare cancer. And we had public health call it GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency disease. And I oftentimes say, what does it do to our psyche of a people to have a terminal disease named after you? Now imagine if diabetes was called black beaties just because the prevalence is high in black community. What it would do, right? And so we remember this time. And this was a time when Ronald Reagan and then George Bush's neoliberal politics was cutting social programs. And crack was the other epidemic. Right? Black community made a political decision to say if black gay men are getting AIDS, we deserved it. It was God's way of getting rid of perversion from the earth. So Ballroom, black gay men began to organize. 1986 creates Gay Men of African Descent. Reverend Charles Angel, let me predate that. 1982, as a church movement, Unity Fellowship Church movement was created by Bishop Carl Beam. Now, this is interesting, talking about the club. 1977, Bishop Carl Beam was on Motown, had a song called I'm Black and I'm Gay and I'm Born This Way. 5 years later, he creates a church movement. Right? 86, GMAD, other countries and other spaces. And so we look at that time, we leapfrog to 2017, and black gay men have the highest HIV prevalence rate in the world. We think that this epidemic is no longer, right? In the world, outside of Botswana, South Africa, they put out a report that by the age of 40, 1 out of every 2 black gay men will be HIV positive. But here is a deep part. Even in resistant discourses as hegemony, as black gay men began to organize in 1986, they ostracized the houseball community out. We were not worthy to be saved. Houseball migrates to D.C. in 86, and in 89 to Philadelphia, in 1990 in Baltimore, impacted by crack, impacted by HIV and AIDS, with no one taking care of it but itself. It takes his concerns to a guy named Gary Paul Wright at GMAC, black gay man, who was working for him. John Michael Harrington, who created People of Color in Crisis, and my good friend and Milton's good friend, Arbor Santana Evisu. The House of Latex Project was created as an intravention, still ministry, right? So, Robert, in 2017, how is it that we can still have this conversation around HIV and AIDS as if it has gone away to some degree, but it continues to impact the community to another degree. And you have oftentimes invoiced this notion of health as a human right. How do we correct sort of the history of a people who have not been afforded?
Shall I introduce myself?
Yes, and do that too.
First of all, thank you for having me here today. It's great to see Rob again. I remember with such fondness as I sort of insinuated myself into the small coterie of folks at Union Theological Seminary. I needed to be there to learn, even though I was not officially enrolled. But I was a sort of a student at the feet of Rob and Michael, and feel very, very blessed to be here with you again in the same space. I, as Michael has said, we do this work together and have done it for a long time, and I wake up every day and I'm grateful to be living at a time where I can be in the same space as Michael. I love this man very, very deeply and feel inspired always by the work that we do together. One of the things that I've sort of moved in a number of directions. I'm trained as a medical anthropologist. I also work as an artist. I worked in public health and remain involved very much in the public health world. I taught at Columbia University in the medical anthropology program in the School of Public Health for a long time. I'm now a professor of interdisciplinary art at the New School, and try to draw from these different languages that I have a kind of poetry of experience and of the world that can in some way sort of contribute to the deep work of freedom that is the unending work, certainly of this nation, but I think of all people in various forms. When I first started becoming involved in the HIV and AIDS world, one of the things that became immediately apparent to me is that what it was revealing in many ways was the contours of inequality, the contours of oppression, and the contours of violence that were deeply rooted and already in place. That the AIDS crisis was not sort of in a way inventing a new set of crises, but was now revealing them in a way that they became impossible to ignore. In many ways, it was also reminding us of the very sort of the unfinished work. The unfinished work of racism, of anti-racist work, the unfinished work of gender and sexual violence, the unfinished work of class violence. The fact that you just looked at the epidemiology of the HIV and AIDS crisis, and it was this devastating illumination of the structural violence of the United States and inevitably globally as well. And clearly, where we sit in 2017 is we are constantly being reminded of the fact that this work of violence remains so deeply rooted and in place. The question for us is, what kind of work needs to be done that has not yet been done in order to be able to address the fact that this AIDS crisis is a condition of history, and that the resolution to the AIDS crisis is not exclusively a biomedical resolution. It's not going to only come through the tools of medicine, and we are deeply grateful for them. The tools of individual prevention, and we are deeply grateful for the fact that the gay community came together and out of its knowledge and experience of knowing how to survive, how to love, how to have pleasure, even in the face of discrimination, of judgment, and of violence, created safer sex. Safer sex was not the creation of the New York City Department of Health. safer sex was not the creation of the Centers for Disease Control. These life-giving practices, like needle exchange, were the creation of those who lived this life, who knew this experience, and who had the knowledge and understanding of their bodies and their community in order to know where the places and practices of safety emerged from. Let me put this very briefly, Michael, in conversation with sort of three things that I've been sitting with, which is silence equals death. Sylvia Rivera saying, you better quiet down, all right? And your invoicing of Bob Rafferty's observation that when the living can no longer speak, the dead will speak for them. Yes, to be silent in our own experience is, in fact, to occupy a place of death. Yet at the same time, silence is the condition of listening. And listening is the fundamental, unavoidable necessity for learning. So the question is not so long, for me, not only how do we speak, how do we deal with silence, but also how do we hold silence, understanding that all silences are not the same. Some silences are the silence of a kind of meditation, of an opening, of the listening beyond what we already know and what we experience. So a question I have for us is, what have we not yet heard that we need to hear in order to be able to know how to move forward and to resolve the kinds of crises that you're reminding of us at this point? All right. Who hasn't listened? Who has not yet had the opportunity to speak their experience? If the life-giving and the power reorganizing that has enabled some of the communities impacted by HIV and AIDS to survive, right? If this work is to continue in order to be able to address this devastating epidemic amongst Black gay men, all right, what kind of organizing and what kind of knowledge has not yet been able to have been articulated or spoken in some way? So this work of listening, I think, is deeply necessary. And how are we going to quiet down where we need to quiet down in order to be able to allow Black gay men, trans women of color, to be able to assume the leadership that will lead us out of the crisis that seems so protracted and so impossible? How will we find the way out of no way?
So you opened the door, thank you for that, to Genovia, who, not last, definitely not least, but this notion of leadership, right? And so Genovia, as a young Black trans woman who's also in the house ball community, as Robert just talked about the epidemic with Black gay men, 34 years later, there's still no epi on Black trans women, right? So what does that feel like for you? And can you please talk about that thing that's on your hat, this House Lives Matter national leadership convening and movement that was created by my daughter Jennifer Lee, the former deputy director of the He Clinic. But please talk about that as a movement, as Robert sort of invoices this notion, how do we get voice to the space of young, particularly, to begin to mobilize in such a way?
Definitely. So, hi, my name is Genovia Chase Milan. You can't pick up Milan. My feelings around the epidemiology of trans women as it pertains to some of the things Robert was speaking about is that it goes back to this notion of like really being invisibilized. I think that, you know, we assume that all trans women want, or trans people want to be centered on the binary and, or want to be outside of that cusp and visibilized as, hey, I'm trans. And a lot of people don't live their lives that way. A lot of people aren't interested in that because, like for folks like myself, that's not who I am in total. So I consider myself a woman, I am a woman, and being trans is just an experience of my womanhood. And so as a lot of the research and things that are being done for trans folks, there is this idea that, oh, trans people are where gay people are, or trans people are, you know, in these specific arenas, but we invisibilize the idea that those trans people may be women and men, and we're not looking into those populations. We're not looking into women of color populations, or we don't look at trans women as being able to live beyond 30 years old, so we're not looking into elderly populations. We're not really expanding and being strategic in the different nuances in which the trans community represent, which goes back to being seen as invisibilized, like, you know, we're not seen, we're not looked at as human, or we're a myth, in a sense, still, even though we're visible, even though we're in the news every day, even though we're in entertainment, even though we're here today, you know? The House Lives Matter, to transition that to the House Lives Matter movement, this was a social justice movement created by Jenny over here. So each year we actually have a national ballroom convening, which has happened for the past 5 years, 6 years, this year, make 6, which tends to happen, and each year there tends to be a different theme. So last year and this year, we have been centered around this House Lives Matter movement, which is really situating ballroom in conversation with our full selves, and beyond being trans or LGBT or queer, what are the situations, circumstances in which we deal with in terms of being Black, in terms of dealing with mass incarceration, our other liberties and liberations that we should be fighting towards, that we tend to forget about when we get into the ball arena, where is our safe haven, which is amazing, but we still have to step out of that arena and think about how we live our lives day to day, and how those other social issues impact us, and we're a part of that conversation. So amongst us being Black bodies, we aren't just a silo of that community. We are a part of the Black community, so we have to recognize those things, and that's some of the consciousness that's been being brought out of the House Lives Matter movement for the ballroom leaders to center ourselves and learning more deeply about ourselves and our struggles, and expanding that knowledge to our kin, for the most part, I guess in Elaine's terms. So yes.
So no, Rob, okay.
Oh yeah, no, I just wanted to say like what I seen, felt, and heard. So a part of me seeing like in the film, I think, where I heard the lyrics in which Janet was saying about, she had mentioned, I'm trying to get the lyrics together. I'm bad with lyrics, so I'm a mumbler. I don't really do the, know the words of songs, but I believe she said, sharing the love that's for you and me. I think that for that really kind of got me to a notion that, you know, love is not a privilege. And I think a lot of times as trans people, we have to prove ourselves to spaces or to people to obtain that love. And that just really spoke really strongly to me, because I just remember being younger, and, you know, to me, a lot of my reflections of womanhood at times is bearing children, and well, at least at one point in my life. And there was this moment that happened when I was younger. My mom was like, oh, well, are you jealous of your sister because, you know, she can have children and you can't? And that just like stabbed me in my heart. I was like, oh, you won this battle, you know, like, and it really, really broke my heart. And then, but through ballroom, which is what I feel, is that, you know, I feel that hope. Like I'm able to relive that idea of maternity, of being able to be paternal, and that mended that wound in which my mother has just instilled in me, or what society instills on us as trans women, is that, you know, because we aren't bearing children in that way, then that natural way, that we are less women, or we're less valuable, so we aren't fully who we say we are. And in ballroom, we get opportunity, we get the space, and in our communities, we get opportunity to relive that in a very significant way. So I still feel that hope and resilience through what ballroom has taught me as a trans woman. So I'm just say that much.
I know, Rob, if you saw Rob, he kind of whispered to me, we're running out of time. So, Rob, is it time to open up for 1 or 2 questions before we end it?
If it's okay if you need to leave, can we do 5 minutes or, yep. And we understand, no offense if you need to step out because we are past time already, but we'll open it up for, and Jack close.
I just don't want anyone who's still here to leave without us thinking. Yeah. Amazing.
I'm
I have a question. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming and being with us and showing us your hearts. I know a question that I get a lot. You know, I'm as a senior minister, straight woman that I am, the queerest straight black woman in America that I am. I get a lot of questions that I know I can't answer. So one of them about trans experience is in the LGBTQI thingy. Do any of our trans friends feel like that's actually not how they, your answer to, no, that's not really me. I'm not really part of that because I'm just a woman or I'm a man. And I just wonder if you would say a little bit about that. How do you feel about the LGBTQI constellation? Do you feel welcome at home? Do you feel inside, outside? And what could we as allies do better?
Well, for me, the acronym and to put that in relationship to what I saw in the film, what triggered me was this notion of this rainbow being a safe haven. It's problematic for me because for us in that acronym, we are the only identity or a gender experience. Everything else is asexuality. So we get wrapped up in that, and that's why we're seen. I don't want to blame that to be the only reason why we're seen as gay or whatever, but that's a part of the issue there. And that goes back to what I was saying about epidemiology. Like, we're straight. Like, there's trans women that are straight or that identify their sexuality as straight. However, I think that because of some folks' consciousness, it's like, why should I associate myself with a community that sees me as an abolishment, as a problem? So I would say that, a part of allyship is one, or friendship, I think, is understanding and wanting to understand and holding oneself accountable for how they show up in other people's lives and not deeming themselves an ally. That is to me, that is something that someone gives you the privilege to be. One cannot claim that they are such a thing for someone.
So I will also say this. I have had the unfortunate experience of being in spaces where I was able to overhear certain conversations. And at times I've heard where a gay male would say, a white gay male would say, oh, I'm gay, you have to accept me. It's like this, it's like that, it's that. But, ooh, it's so hard for the black gay guys. And then I had the unfortunate experience of hearing a black gay male say, in explaining why he was gay, he's like, I'm gay and I still love God and thing, but at least I'm not trans. And so what I have experienced is that it's like we're placed at the bottom of this barrel where it's like everyone is, well, okay, at least I understand myself and I know what I have and I may be lesbian, but at least I'm not trying to go change my body and change what God gives me. And then this narrative starts to become hypocrisy because we're going from, I can be me. I can be gay, I can be lesbian, I can be two-spirited, which is what that T stands for, okay? And I could be questioning, I could be curious, I could be bi. But trans, all of a sudden now, religion takes place. No, if God wanted me to be a man, I would have done that. So there is that thing where it kind of puts us at the bottom of the barrel, and we're not supposed to be there. And what we are actually are the teachers. of life, because we're teaching you that this is not a dichotomy. When you look at trans women and men, our spectrum goes from taking hormones to not taking hormones to being able to be fluid, gender fluid. You know, and I think this is what challenges the binary that a lot of people accept.
Can I say something very quickly about this? Yeah?
Oh, thanks.
I just want to say something very quickly in response to this as well. First of all, just to give you a very quick example of the implications of what you're saying, is at the moment I'm working to organize a big national conversation that is sponsored by the federal government around the intersection between gender and mental health and addiction recovery. One of the very first questions I asked was, is this going to be going to include trans experience? Is this going to include gender non-conforming or non-binary identified folks? Right? And basically, the short answer to that is no. I mean, first of all, there was an attempt to say, we'll have another panel in which it will deal with gay and lesbian issues. And of course, my pushback was, this is a gender issue. We're going to actually overcome that by, in the official documents, not referring to this, but we're going to invite folks into this conversation who are going to speak this. So we're going to subvert this in some way. So I think one of the issues of alliance is to be able to be sneaky, to be able to learn how to use the leverage in order to be able to actually constantly be pushing against the normative. But the thing I really want to say is this, which is, in my experience, what I have learned is that the great wisdom and the great emancipatory and liberatory knowledge comes from those who are invisible, quiet, silenced, marginalized. And this is, you know, what Tyra Dominic is saying is the great lessons. It's not so much for us to be only to be supporting trans folks in their struggle, but to be realizing that the truly radical work, radical meaning getting to the roots of the whole thing, is to understand that our own gender hegemony, our own notion that our gender identities are resolved,
That's right.
that they are settled, that they actually are, there's no problem in them, is to begin to be freed from that blindness and that silence into moving out of the complacency of thinking of ourselves as being into the great future and possibility of becoming. And that is, you know, that is truly the radical work, is to allow ourselves to be undone. And that's what I would say is the great sort of extraordinary prophetic characteristic of silence, to be able to put ourselves in the place of silence in order to be able to hear that great spirit of possibility speaking to us. So to break out of our complacency, and this is when I always am, you know, I know and love the two of you, and we've been together so many, many times. Over and over, it is that invitation to release myself from my own sense of certainty and being. And to do that with the two of you is always, you know.
You're the best. We love you.
And Robert, that undoneness is that philosophical notion of dying.
Of dying.
You have to die. You really have to die in order to be reborn. So thank you for that.
So I think we're at time now, and it is, Genovia, what you said and about being invited to allyship and actually friendship is a beautiful thing. Allyship seems a little like a friendship is something, higher stakes there. But that you don't claim it, you get invited into it. And this idea of becoming, certainly even in a place like Middle that has been becoming for quite some time, we still have centuries of church legacy. No matter how beautiful and how inviting we can be, you walk in and there's still a lot that has been placed just in the cross and in the space that won't be done today. So, of course, we are going to invite y'all back, and I hope you come back. I hope you come back on Sunday and worship with us and celebrate. And so this is not going to end. This is an ongoing conversation, and I know Jacqui's committed to it. And so I do want to thank you all again for coming, for being here today, and for trusting to come back.
You know,
Can I do something? And we have to recognize that, which is in our presence. You know, we have an icon. Don't do me. What Milton Latex Ninja has been in his work,
Woo! Milton!
has been in his community. You know, Milton is one of those that we were having this conversation, those quiet warriors, gentle spirit. No matter how much negativity can surround Milton, Milton comes into space and he lightens it up. This gentle spirit's a gift.
Come be with me. Beautiful. We're going to give everybody a benediction, okay? Y'all don't know, we have vogued on that pulpit. Okay? Yes, we have. So we want to, today's your birthday? Tuesday, you'll turn how many? Go ahead, girl. 47. 47 on Tuesday. So we want to, if I bless them, Milton, will you turn your hand to bless them? You bless them. I'm blessing them. First of all, please come home again to see us. This is a place for you to be a welcome with us. We'd love it. So my blessing is for all of us. That last little piece of conversation, I think, is the sermon, that we are all becoming, that our categories are all fluid, and perhaps the best gift of life is for our two-spirit, gender fluid, not gender conforming, real people to invite us to be our real self. So may we be real and true and free. And may you be blessed. Amen.
That's it.